Hey there, and welcome back for another video about English. If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. The other day, one of my students told me she was confused as to when to say myself versus by myself. And because I've heard other people struggling with these two expressions as well, I decided to make this video. Today, we'll delve into the difference between the expressions of myself, yourself, etc., and by myself, by yourself, etc. First, let's explore the meaning and uses in sentences. The word myself is a part of a family of reflexive or emphasizing pronouns. Myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself, ourselves, yourselves, themselves, and oneself. These pronouns are used when the subject and object of a sentence refer to the same person or thing. As reflexive pronouns, they indicate that the action is directed back to the same entity performing it. As emphasizing pronouns, they're used to add emphasis on who is performing the action. So I can use myself when the action is performed by me and it's either directed back to me, or if I want to emphasize the fact that I am doing the action. Similarly, I can use yourself when the action is performed by you and it's directed back to you, or when I want to stress on the fact that it's done by you. You get the point. The word oneself is primarily used in writing and in more formal language as a reflexive pronoun, and it refers to a generic person rather than specific individuals. For example, one should always strive to be true to oneself. Let's now look at different uses of myself. Here are some examples of the use of myself as a reflexive pronoun where my action is directed back to me. I'm going to buy myself a cup of coffee. I ask myself whom I want to become. I talked myself out of it. In these examples, you are the doer and the receiver. This means that you're doing the action, but you're also applying the action to you. You're buying the coffee for you. You're asking you. You're convincing you not to do something.
But I soon realized I couldn't support myself on that amount of money.
Let's also look at a slightly different pattern with verbs that require preposition before the object. For example, she often speaks to herself. I need to rely on myself. We laughed at ourselves.
And I thought to myself, I don't even know what his voice sounds like.
But you can also use myself to add emphasis. That is, to emphasize the fact that you are the one doing the action and not someone else. The function of myself in this context is known as the emphasizing pronoun.
And I myself did not know that answer.
For example, I fixed the car myself. Notice that in speech, we're putting the stress on self. I wrote the report myself. I myself am responsible for the project's success. These sentences would be perfectly okay without using myself. You could say, I fixed the car. I wrote the report. I am responsible for the project's success. But by adding myself, you're emphasizing that it was you who did it. Now, the expression by myself means on my own or alone and without the help or the company of anyone else. If you've done something by yourself, it means that no one else has helped you.
I was by myself for a week and a half on the way into Omaha.
For example, I studied by myself. I went to Italy by myself. Before I got married, I lived by myself. In these sentences, you can swap by myself with alone or on my own. I studied alone, or I studied on my own. I went to Italy alone, or I went to Italy on my own. Before I got married, I lived alone, or before I got married, I lived on my own. Now, let's address some potential confusions that can come up when you swap myself and by myself. There are many cases where such change wouldn't affect the meaning in a significant way, and we'll explore those later in this video. But first, let's examine situations where the meaning does indeed change. Let's say you're married or you live with someone and your significant other went on a business trip. One of your friends calls and asks you, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" You can say, "Well, my husband is on a business trip. I'm by myself." This means that you're home alone. But now imagine the exact same situation, but you answer, "Well, my husband is on a business trip. I am myself." This changes the whole meaning. Being yourself means that you like who you are, that you live your life the way you want to without asking permission from anyone else. So if you say, "My husband is on a business trip, I'm myself," this means that you feel you can show your real personality only when your spouse is away. That's a terrible way to feel and say. Let's go over some other examples. I painted by myself versus I painted myself. These two sentences have very different meanings. I painted by myself means that you produced a painting or painted a room, for example, alone without anyone else's help. On the other hand, I painted myself can be interpreted in a couple of ways depending on the context. It may either mean that you created a painting representing you, or that you painted something on your own body. If you want to emphasize that it's you who took the action of painting, you have to include the object of painting explicitly. I painted it myself, or I myself painted it. Here, it is the object of painting, and myself emphasizes the fact that you were the one who painted it. Here's another example. I study by myself versus I study myself. I study by myself means that you study alone without anyone else. I study myself means that you're examining your own body. Maybe you're looking in the mirror. Here's a sentence I found online when I searched for this term. I studied myself in the mirror, telling myself that I was beautiful inside and out, trying hard to believe the outward part. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are many cases where swapping myself and by myself produces a difference that is much more subtle. Here, if you use one instead of the other, it's not going to completely change the meaning like it did in the previous examples. Let's look at the difference between I did it myself and I did it by myself. When you say I did it myself, you emphasize that it was you and not anyone else who did it. When you say I did it by myself, you're stressing on the fact that you were alone when you did it. Basically, you can think of these two phrases as I did it, where the emphasis is on I, and I did it alone, where the emphasis is on alone. This would be a good way to check if you're using the one you want to use. Here are more examples. She completed the project herself versus she completed the project by herself. I cooked dinner myself versus I cooked dinner by myself. Okay, friends, that's all for today. Let me know in the comments if there are any other similar words or phrases that still confuse you. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel to get more tips on grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, culture, and motivation. I'll see you in the next video.